Hey, welcome back to English in Fluency. I'm Alex, and I am so glad you're here today, because what we're going to do in this episode is something that I personally think is one of the most powerful things you can practice as an English learner. We're going to work on understanding conditions in real, everyday English conversations. And I don't just mean grammar rules. I mean actually listening to how real people talk, how they use if, how they use when, how they use phrases like in case, as long as, unless, and being able to follow the meaning clearly, naturally, the way fluent speakers do. Now, let me ask you something honest. Have you ever been listening to someone speak in English, and they said something like, "If I were you, I'd just leave," or, "Unless you've already eaten, we could grab something." And for just 1 second, you paused, you understood each word, but the whole meaning felt a little blurry? Like something in your brain said, "Wait, wait, what does that actually mean?" If that's happened to you, you are not alone. That happens to so many B1 learners, and honestly, it happens because conditional sentences are not just grammar. They are about logic. They are about following the speaker's reasoning in real time, while you're listening, while the conversation is happening. And that is a skill, a real skill, one you can build with the right kind of practice. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. I'm going to walk you through real conversations. We'll listen, we'll analyze, we'll slow things down, we'll explore meaning, and by the time we're done, I want you to feel like conditions in English make total sense to you. Not just on a test. In real life. When someone is actually talking to you. Ready? Let's go. First, let me just set the scene a little bit. Conditional sentences in English are basically sentences where one thing depends on another thing. That's the core idea. If this happens, then that happens. Or if this were true, then that would be true. The if part sets up a condition, and the then part tells you the result. Now, in writing, this can look very clean and organized, but when people speak, it can get a little messier, a little faster, and sometimes they even leave out words. That's why listening practice is so important here. It's not enough to just study the grammar. You have to actually hear it in action. There are a few types of conditional sentences that you'll come across constantly in everyday English. We have what many teachers call the real conditional, which is used for things that are actually possible. Then we have the unreal, or hypothetical conditional, which is for imaginary situations, things that aren't true right now. And we also have the past conditional, which talks about how things could have been different if something in the past had gone differently. Now, I'm not going to teach you these as grammar formulas today. I want you to experience them the way a real listener would, through stories, through conversation, through context. Let's start with our first conversation. I want you to read this one slowly, as if you're hearing it for the first time. Imagine two people, friends, sitting in a coffee shop. Their names are Nina and Tobias. Nina is trying to decide whether to apply for a new job, and Tobias is giving her advice. Nina said, "I don't know. I keep thinking about it, but I feel like if I apply and they reject me, I'll be devastated." Tobias looked at her and said, "Okay, but if you don't apply, you'll never know. And then you'll just keep wondering." Nina stirred her coffee and said quietly, "That's true. But what if I'm not good enough?" Tobias leaned forward a little and said, "Look, if you were not good enough, they wouldn't have asked you to apply in the first place. Someone recommended you, remember? Nina nodded slowly. Yeah, you're right. Okay. If I get the interview, I'll call you immediately. Tobias smiled. And if you get the job, we're celebrating. I don't care what day it is. All right? Did you follow that? Let's slow down and look at it together. Because there were actually 5 different conditional structures in that short conversation, and each one had a slightly different feeling and meaning. The first one was Nina saying, "If I apply and they reject me, I'll be devastated." This is a real conditional. It's talking about something that could actually happen. The structure is if plus present tense, will plus verb. Nina is saying this is a real possibility. It's not imaginary. She actually might apply. They might actually reject her. And she's imagining the result. When you hear this structure, the feeling is usually, this could really happen, and here's what I think the result will be. Then Tobias says, if you don't apply, you'll never know. Same structure, real conditional. Tobias is saying, this is also a real possibility, and here's the result. He's using the same form to give her a different perspective. A lot of the time in real conversations, people go back and forth like this. One person gives one if scenario, and the other person counters with another if scenario. It's almost like a kind of debate or negotiation, and being able to follow both sides is really important. Now here's where it gets interesting. Tobias says, if you were not good enough, they wouldn't have asked you to apply in the first place. Did you notice that? The verb changed. He didn't say, if you are not good enough. He said, if you were not good enough. That shift from are to were is actually enormous in terms of meaning. That little word were is telling you, this is not the real situation. Tobias is actually saying, in his mind, she is good enough. He's using the unreal conditional to argue that the bad scenario she's imagining isn't actually true. This is so common in real English conversations. When someone wants to reassure you, they often use the unreal conditional to show you that your fear is imaginary, not real. If that were true, or if you were in trouble, used with would signals. I don't actually believe this is true. I'm just showing you how unlikely it is. And then, at the end of their conversation, Nina says, if I get the interview, I'll call you immediately. Back to the real conditional, because now she's shifting her mindset. She's gone from imagining rejection to imagining success. And Tobias matches her energy. If you get the job, we're celebrating. He doesn't even say, we will celebrate. He says, we're celebrating, which is even more confident. It's like he's so sure about it that he's almost talking about it as if it's already happening. This is something I love about natural English. The grammar bends a little bit, depending on how confident or certain you feel. The more certain you are about something, the more you can use the present, continuous, even in a conditional sentence. It's not wrong. It's actually very natural and native sounding. Let's move on to our second conversation. This one is a bit different in tone. It's a little more tense, a little more serious. I want you to pay attention not just to the grammar structure, but also to the emotion behind the words. The two speakers here are Mara and her brother, Daniel. They're talking about their mother's health situation and what they should do. Daniel called Mara one evening and said, if Mom doesn't start going to those doctor appointments, something is going to go wrong. We can't just ignore this. Mara sighed and said, I know. but she won't listen to me. If you talk to her, maybe she'll actually hear it. Daniel said, I tried last week. She shut me down completely. I'm telling you, unless someone sits down with her and really explains what could happen, she's going to keep avoiding it. Mara was quiet for a moment and then said, what if we go together? Like, both of us, at the same time. If we both show up, she'll know we're serious. Daniel thought about it. Yeah, that could work. As long as we don't argue in front of her. If we start disagreeing with each other, she'll use it as a distraction and the whole thing will fall apart. Mara said, agreed. And if she still refuses after that, I think we need to talk to her doctor directly. Like, get some professional advice on how to handle this. Daniel said quietly, let's hope it doesn't come to that. But yeah, if it does, we'll figure it out together. Okay, there's so much to unpack in that conversation. Let me walk you through some of the key moments. The very first line, Daniel saying, if Mom doesn't start going to those doctor appointments, something is going to go wrong, is a real conditional again, but it's got a strong emotional weight to it. He's not just making a neutral prediction, he's expressing genuine worry. When you hear is going to instead of will, that often feels a little more certain, a little more immediate. Something will go wrong sounds like a general prediction. Something is going to go wrong sounds like Daniel truly believes this is coming. That's a subtle difference, but fluent listeners pick up on it. Then Mara says, if you talk to her, maybe she'll actually hear it. That little word, maybe, is doing a lot of work here. When someone adds maybe to a conditional sentence, they're softening the result. They're not totally sure. They're hoping, but not promising. This is very common in real life. People rarely say, if you do X, Y will definitely happen. In real conversations, people hedge. They add maybe, probably, I think, possibly. These hedging words are actually signals of how certain or uncertain the speaker is about the result. And learning to pick them up helps you understand not just the words, but the speaker's confidence level. Now, let's look at what Daniel says next. Unless someone sits down with her and really explains what could happen, she's going to keep avoiding it. The word unless is so important here. Unless basically means if not. So Daniel is saying, if someone does not sit down with her and explain, she's going to keep avoiding it. When you hear unless, you need to flip it in your mind slightly. The condition is stated in the negative, and the result is what will happen because of that absence of action. It takes a tiny bit of mental switching when you're listening, but with practice, it becomes totally automatic. Then Mara suggests, if we both show up, she'll know we're serious. Simple, direct, real, conditional. And then Daniel adds a really important layer. As long as we don't argue in front of her. Now, as long as is a conditional phrase that adds a requirement. It's like saying, this plan works, but only under this condition. It's similar to saying, only if we don't argue. When you hear as long as, the speaker is telling you there's a condition that must be met for the plan to work. If that condition is broken, the whole plan falls apart. And Daniel even shows that by saying, if we start disagreeing with each other, she'll use it as a distraction, and the whole thing will fall apart. So there's actually a conditional inside a conditional. The overall plan works, as long as they stay united. But if they don't stay united, the inner condition kicks in and produces a bad result. Following this kind of nested logic while listening is a real B1 challenge, and I want you to know that if you found that a little tricky to follow, that's completely normal. It just means it's exactly the right level for you to be practicing. Let's take a short moment to talk about something that listeners often find confusing, which is the difference between if and when. These two words can sometimes feel similar, but they actually carry different meanings. Imagine someone says, "If it rains tomorrow, I'll stay home," versus, "When it rains, the streets flood." Do you feel the difference? The first one uses if because rain tomorrow is uncertain. It might happen, it might not. But the second one uses when because flooding when it rains is a certain predictable thing. It always happens. When is used for things that are certain or that always follow a pattern. If is used when there's uncertainty, when something might or might not happen. In real conversations, this distinction tells you a lot about what the speaker believes. If someone says, "If I get promoted, I'll move to a bigger apartment," they're not sure about the promotion. But if they say, "When I get promoted, I'm moving to a bigger apartment," they sound very confident, almost as if the promotion is already decided. When you're listening, paying attention to whether someone uses if or when gives you a window into their mindset, their level of confidence or uncertainty about the future. Now, let's dive into our third conversation. This one is going to introduce you to the past conditional, and I want you to really feel the emotion in it. The past conditional is often used when people are reflecting on the past, talking about regrets, about things that could have been different. The two people in this conversation are Sophia and her old friend, Marcus. They haven't seen each other in years, and they've just run into each other at a train station. Sophia laughed a little awkwardly and said, "I can't believe it. Of all places." "Marcus, how long has it been?" Marcus smiled. "Too long. Too long. What are you doing here?" Sophia said, "I'm catching a train to see my sister. She just had a baby. Can you believe it?" Then her expression softened a little and she said, "It's funny. I was actually thinking about you recently, about how things might have been different." Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah, me too, honestly. If I hadn't taken that job in Berlin, I think we would have stayed in touch." Sophia said quietly, "I think so. If I had known you were going to leave so suddenly, I would have said a proper goodbye, at least." Marcus looked a little sad. "I know. I should have handled that better. If I had been more honest with myself about what I wanted back then, I wouldn't have made so many rushed decisions." Sophia said, "Well, we're here now. That's something, right?" Marcus nodded. "It is. And hey, if you're ever back in the city, we should get coffee. Actually, get coffee. Not one of those we should catch up things that never actually happens." Sophia laughed. "Okay. Yeah. Let's actually do that." That conversation was beautiful in a quiet way, and it's full of past conditionals. Let me break it down. Marcus says, "If I hadn't taken that job in Berlin, I think we would have stayed in touch." This is the classic past conditional form. If plus had plus past participle, would have plus past participle. The key thing to understand is that this is talking about a situation in the past that did not happen. Marcus did take the job. They did not stay in touch. The past conditional is saying, imagine the alternative timeline, the one where the decision was different. And the result in that imaginary timeline is we would have stayed in touch. When you hear this structure, the emotional signal is almost always regret or reflection. The speaker is looking back and wondering, what if things had gone differently? Then Sophia says, if I had known you were going to leave so suddenly, I would have said a proper goodbye. Same structure. Sophia didn't know. So she didn't say a proper goodbye. She's looking back and imagining the version of events where she did know. The regret here is gentle, but real. She's not blaming Marcus directly, but there's a sadness in it. A wish that things had happened differently. And then Marcus takes it further and gets really honest. If I had been more honest with myself about what I wanted back then, I wouldn't have made so many rushed decisions. This is Marcus not just talking about one specific event, but about his whole mindset back then. He's reflecting on how a different version of himself, a more self-aware version, would have led to a different life. That's actually a very mature and emotionally complex thing to say, and the past conditional is the exact grammatical tool that makes that kind of reflection possible in English. Now, notice how at the end of the conversation, Marcus shifts completely. He says, if you're ever back in the city, we should get coffee. That's back to the real conditional. Simple present tense in the if part. He's no longer looking back. He's looking forward. He's creating a new possibility. That shift from past conditional to real conditional is actually an emotional shift too. From regret to hope. From what could have been to what could still be. That's the beauty of following conditional structures in real conversation. They're not just grammar. They're emotion. They're the shape of how people think and feel. Let's take a breather and practice something together. I'm going to give you some sentence beginnings, and I want you to think about how you would complete them. Don't overthink it. Just follow the logic and the emotion. Ready? Here's the first one. If I had studied harder in school... Take a moment. What would have been different? You might say, if I had studied harder in school, I would have gotten into a better university. Or maybe, if I had studied harder in school, I wouldn't have felt so stressed during exams. Notice how both completions are about something in the past that didn't happen. The would have in the result tells you that the whole thing is imaginary. A different version of the past. Try another one. If it snows tonight. Now this is a real conditional, right? Something uncertain that might happen. You might say, if it snows tonight, I'll work from home tomorrow. Or maybe, if it snows tonight, my kids are going to be thrilled. Notice how you naturally want to use will or going to in the result part. That's the grammar working with your instinct. One more. Unless you tell me what happened. Feel the weight of this one. There's almost a slight warning in it. You might say, unless you tell me what happened, I can't help you. Or, unless you tell me what happened, I'm going to assume the worst. Unless creates a slightly pressured feeling. It's like saying, the only way to avoid a bad result is if you do this thing. What I want you to notice about these practice sentences is that you probably felt the meaning before you fully analyze the grammar. That's actually a sign that you're making real progress. When the logic of conditional sentences starts to feel natural, when you can complete them without stopping to think about the rules, that's when you're moving from knowing English to actually using English. Let's go back to conversations. Our fourth one is a workplace setting. Two colleagues, Priya and James, are discussing a presentation that's due the next day. They've run into a problem with the data. Priya walked into James's office and said, "Hey, so I was just going through the slides and I found something. If the numbers in section 3 are wrong, the whole conclusion falls apart." James immediately looked up. "What? Are they wrong?" Priya said, "I don't know yet. I'm checking. But if they are, we're going to have to stay late tonight." James leaned back and rubbed his eyes. "Okay, if they're wrong, what do we do? Just pull the section?" Priya shook her head. "We can't. The client asked specifically about those figures. If we remove them without an explanation, it's going to look like we're hiding something." James thought for a second. "What if we just flag it? Like, add a footnote and say the data is being verified?" Priya said, "That could work, as long as we're upfront about it. If we try to bury it and they notice during the presentation, that's going to be much worse than just being honest now." James nodded. "Agreed. Okay. If the numbers turn out to be correct, we're fine, and none of this matters. But if they're off by even a small amount, we need to decide tonight how we're handling it." Priya said, "I'll know within the hour. I'll message you. If I don't message you by 7, just call me." James said, "Okay. And Priya, if this turns out to be fine, I'm buying you coffee tomorrow. You just saved us a potential disaster." Priya laughed a little. "Don't thank me yet. That conversation is packed with real conditional sentences, and they're all doing something very practical. They're being used to plan, to problem solve, to weigh options. This is actually one of the most common uses of conditional sentences in real life. When you're at work, when you're planning something, when you're making decisions, you constantly use conditionals to lay out different possibilities and their results. Let me highlight a few moments. When Priya says, "If the numbers in section 3 are wrong, the whole conclusion falls apart," she's using the conditional to present a risk. She's not saying the numbers are wrong. She's saying if they are, here's what it means. That kind of cautious language is very professional and very natural. In real workplaces, people do this all the time. They present possible problems in conditional form rather than stating them as certain facts, because it sounds more measured and less alarmist. When James says, "If they're wrong, what do we do? Just pull the section?" He's doing something interesting. He's using a conditional question to explore options. He's not asserting what they could do. He's opening up a space for problem solving. Conditional questions like this, "If this happens, what do we do?" are really common in real conversations, and they often lead to collaborative thinking, brainstorming, decision-making. Then Priya says something really important. If we try to bury it, and they notice during the presentation, that's going to be much worse than just being honest now. This is using the conditional to make an argument about strategy. She's not just describing what might happen. She's comparing two possible futures and making a case that one is clearly worse than the other. This is the rhetorical power of conditional sentences. You can lay out two if scenarios side by side and let the comparison do the persuading. And at the very end, James says, "If I don't message you by 7, just call me." That "if not" construction is really practical and very common. "If I don't" means in case I forget or in case something goes wrong. It's setting up a backup plan. When you hear this in conversation, The speaker is being responsible. They're thinking ahead about potential obstacles and covering for them. Now I want to touch on something that often catches B1 learners off guard, which is the way would works in conditional sentences. A lot of learners know that would goes in the result part of an unreal conditional. If I had more time, I would travel more. Fine. But in real speech, would shows up in some surprising places, and understanding these uses will really sharpen your listening comprehension. For example, you might hear someone say, "If you would just listen to me for a second, I could explain." Now, this isn't the standard unreal conditional. It's not hypothetical. The would here is being used to express frustration or a polite request. It's like saying, "I'm asking you to listen." The condition isn't really a condition in the logical sense. It's more of a plea. When you hear, "if you would," or "if you could in this way," the speaker is often making a request, and there's sometimes an emotional undertone of impatience or hope. You might also hear, "That would be nice," after someone describes a condition. "If we all finished early today, that would be so nice." The would here is signaling a wish, a hope, something the speaker wants to be true. Even though the sentence follows conditional structure, the emotional message is more like, "I hope this happens," rather than, "Let me describe an imaginary situation." Learning to read the emotion behind the grammar is one of the most important things you can develop as a listener. Words are just words until you hear the tone, the context, the feeling behind them. And conditional sentences are especially rich in emotion because they're almost always about choices, possibilities, fears, hopes, and regrets. Let's do one more full conversation before we wrap up. This one is between a mother and her teenage son, Eli. She's talking to him about his plans after high school, and it's a warm, slightly tense, very real exchange. His mom, who her friends all called Vera, sat across from Eli at the kitchen table one Saturday morning and said, "So, have you thought any more about university? Applications close in 2 months." Eli shrugged. "Kind of. I don't know if I even want to go straight to university. What if I take a gap year?" Vera said carefully, "I'm not against a gap year. But if you take one, what would you actually do with it? Like, do you have a plan?" Eli said, I was thinking I could travel a bit. Maybe work in another country for a while. If I save enough money over summer, I could probably afford a few months abroad." Vera nodded slowly. "Okay, if you can actually save that money and you have a clear plan, I think I could support that. But if you just take a year and do nothing, I'd be really worried." Eli said, "Mom, I wouldn't just do nothing." Vera said, I know you wouldn't. But if you do decide on the gap year, we should sit down and make an actual plan, like, with goals, not just a vague idea." Eli looked at her. "What if I applied to universities now, but deferred, so I'd have a place waiting for me? Would that make you feel better?" Vera's face softened immediately. "Yeah, honestly. If you did that, I'd feel a lot more comfortable. Because then at least you'd have something to come back to." Eli said, "Okay, I'll look into it. If I can defer, I'll do that. If I can't, we'll figure something else out." Vera reached across the table and said, "You know, whatever happens, I just want you to be happy. And whatever you decide, if you need help thinking it through, I'm here." Eli smiled a little. "I know, Mom. Thanks." There's so much warmth in that conversation, And it's also a great example of how conditional sentences are used in real family discussions, in negotiations, in moments where two people are trying to understand each other and find common ground. Let me point out a few things. When Vera says, "If you take one, what would you actually do with it?" She's using a mixed conditional style. The "if you take" is present tense, but "what would you do" uses would, which adds a slight hypothetical distance. She's not saying the gap year is definitely going to happen. She's exploring the idea carefully. This kind of hedged language is so natural between parents and teenagers, or between any two people who are carefully navigating a sensitive topic. When Eli says, "If I save enough money over summer, I could probably afford a few months abroad," that word "could" is doing something important. Instead of "will," he uses "could," which expresses possibility rather than certainty. He's being realistic. He's acknowledging that this depends on something, saving enough money, and even then, it's not a guarantee. Could softens the prediction. It makes it honest rather than overconfident. Vera then says, "If you can actually save that money and you have a clear plan, I think I could support that." She uses "could" too, and she adds, "I think." This is hedged, cautious language from someone who is genuinely trying to be open-minded, but also has real concerns. She's not shutting Eli down. She's not saying yes either. She's saying, there are conditions, and if those conditions are met, I'm open to it. This is conditional language used as a form of communication that keeps both parties in the conversation, keeps the door open, avoids conflict, while still expressing real feelings. Then Eli says something really smart. What if I applied to universities now, but deferred? This is a beautiful use of "what if" as a conditional question. What if, in English, is a way of introducing a new idea, a new possibility, usually one that might solve a problem or make a situation better. It's softer than saying, "I have a plan." It invites the other person to consider something. When you hear "what if" in a conversation, the speaker is usually being creative and collaborative. They're problem-solving out loud. And at the very end, Vera says, "Whatever happens, I just want you to be happy. And whatever you decide, if you need help thinking it through, I'm here." That "whatever" is a really interesting conditional word. Whatever happens means regardless of what happens or under any condition. It's an unconditional statement inside a world of conditions, which makes it feel warm and grounding. And then she adds a real conditional. If you need help, I'm here. Simple, generous, and deeply human. Let's now talk about something that will really help you when you're listening to fast, natural English. In real conversation, people often shorten conditional structures. They drop words. They merge things together. And if you're expecting the textbook form, it can be confusing. For example, instead of saying, "If I were you, I would talk to her," someone might just say, "I'd talk to her if I were you." The result comes first, and the condition comes at the end. This reversal is very common in speech. The most important information, the advice or the action, comes first, and the condition kind of floats in at the end as an explanation. You need to be flexible as a listener and understand that the "if" clause can come before or after the main clause, and the meaning is the same either way. Also, people often shorten "I would" to "I'd," "he would" to "he'd," "they would" to "they'd." So instead of "if she came, I would feel much better," you hear "if she came, I'd feel much better." That contraction can be easy to miss, especially if you're not expecting it. Training your ear to recognize contractions in conditional sentences will make a huge difference in your listening fluency. Another common shortening is in questions. Instead of, "What would you do if you were in my situation?" people often say, "What would you do in my situation?" They drop the "if you were" part completely because the context makes it obvious that it's hypothetical. This kind of shortening happens all the time in real speech, and the more you listen to real English, the more you'll start to predict these shortenings automatically. Now, let's do our last conversation. This one is a little lighter, a little more playful. Two friends, Cleo and Dom, are planning a road trip together and joking around about all the things that could go wrong and go right. Cleo was scrolling through her phone and said, "Okay, so I found this route. It would take us through 3 national parks. If the weather holds up, it's going to be incredible." Dom grinned. "If the car doesn't break down?" Cleo looked at him. "Why would the car break down? It's a perfectly fine car." Dom shrugged. "It made a weird noise last week." Cleo said, "It always makes weird noises. If I had stopped driving every time it made a weird noise, I'd have never gone anywhere. It's fine." Dom said, "Okay, but hypothetically, if we broke down in the middle of nowhere, what would we do?" Cleo thought about it. "We'd call roadside assistance, or flag someone down. People help each other on road trips. I've seen it happen." Dom said, "If we had a flat tire, could you actually change it?" Cleo paused. "I mean, if you had the tools and the instructions, yes. Theoretically, yes." Dom burst out laughing. "So no." Cleo laughed too. "Look, if everything goes smoothly, which it will, we won't need any of that. And if something does go wrong, we'll handle it. We always do." Dom said, "That's actually fair. Okay, if you're committed, I'm committed." Cleo said, "I'm committed. If we leave by Friday, we can make it to the first park by Saturday morning." Dom said, "And if the park entrance is closed?" Cleo threw a pillow at him. "Dom." Dom was still laughing. "I'm just being thorough." I love that conversation because it shows how conditionals work even in casual, playful exchanges. Cleo and Dom are literally going through all the ifs, and it's funny and warm and very real. That's the thing about conditional language. It's not just for serious moments. People use it when they're planning, when they're joking, when they're being cautious or adventurous or worried or excited. Cleo's line, "If I had stopped driving every time it made a weird noise, I'd have never gone anywhere," is a really elegant past conditional used for a humorous argument. She's saying, imagine a past where I responded to every weird noise. That would have been a past where I went nowhere. So clearly, ignoring the noise has worked out fine. She's using the past conditional to justify her present behavior. It's quite clever when you think about it. And Dom's playful, hypothetically. If we broke down in the middle of nowhere, what would we do? Is the unreal conditional used to explore worst-case scenarios in a light-hearted way? He's not genuinely worried. He's just being Dom, the kind of person who thinks about contingencies, who has that slightly anxious but funny habit of imagining everything that could go wrong. And Cleo's answer, we'd call roadside assistance, is confident and practical. The contrast between their personalities shows up right there in how they each use conditional language. As we move toward the end of today's episode, I want to summarize the key things that we've covered, but I want to do it in a way that sticks. So let me tell you what to listen for the next time you're watching a movie, listening to a podcast, or having a conversation in English. When you hear if plus a present tense verb, you're in real conditional territory. Something is possible, and the speaker is describing what will follow. Listen for will, going to, can, or might in the result part. These give you signals about how certain the speaker is about the outcome. When you hear if plus were or a past tense verb, you're in unreal conditional territory. The speaker is talking about something imaginary, something they don't believe is true right now. Listen for would, could, might in the result. These modal verbs are your signal that you've left the world of real possibilities and entered the world of imagination, hypotheticals, and often emotion. When you hear if plus had plus a past participle, you're in past conditional territory. The speaker is reflecting on the past, usually with some element of regret, wonder, or reflection about how things might have been different. Listen for would have, could have, might have in the result. These past modal forms tell you this is about a path not taken, a decision not made, a moment that has already passed. And when you hear unless, it's basically if not. Flip it in your mind. Unless you call me means if you don't call me. Unless the weather changes means if the weather doesn't change. It takes a half second of mental switching, but it becomes automatic with practice. When you hear as long as, the speaker is setting a condition that must be true for something to work. It's like a prerequisite. As long as you're honest with me means on the condition that you're honest with me. When you hear what if, the speaker is introducing a new possibility, often as a suggestion or a creative solution, sometimes as a way to explore risks, and sometimes just out of curiosity or playfulness. Now here is the thing that I want to leave you with, because I think it's the most important thing of all. Conditional sentences are not just grammar. They are the structure of human thinking. They are the way people express hope and fear, regret and anticipation, plans and alternatives. Every time you hear a conditional sentence, you're getting a window into how the speaker's mind works, what they're worried about, what they're hoping for, what they wish had been different, what they believe is possible. When you practice listening for conditional structures, you're not just practicing grammar. You're practicing empathy. You're practicing the ability to follow a person's reasoning and emotional journey in real time. And that is one of the most valuable things any language learner can develop. Not just for passing a test, not just for ticking a box, but for genuinely connecting with people in English. For understanding not just what they say, but what they mean. Not just what they tell you, but what they feel. I hope today's episode gave you that feeling, even a little bit. The feeling of sitting inside a real conversation and following it, understanding it, sensing the emotion behind the words. Because that's what fluency really feels like. It's not perfection. It's connection. It's being present with another person in their language. If you found today's episode useful, please share it with someone who's learning English. It would mean the world to me, and honestly, it might mean the world to them too. If you're not already subscribed to English in Fluency, please subscribe right now. Hit that button because we come out with new episodes regularly. and every single one is designed to help you grow in real, practical, human ways. If you want to practice more, write a comment below. Write a conditional sentence. Any kind. Real, unreal, past, doesn't matter. Write it, and I will personally read it and respond. Because that interaction, that real exchange, is what makes this community special. And if you have a topic you'd like me to cover in a future episode, something you find confusing, something you want to understand more deeply, just leave a suggestion in the comments. I read every single one. This is Alex from English in Fluency, and I'll see you in the next episode. Keep listening, keep growing, and remember, if you keep showing up, the language will come. It always does. Take care.